Lewis Hamilton is 1 second faster than Charles Leclerc in the Imola Grand Prix. Stay until the end to see the argument between both drivers in the paddock after the race. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. What followed after the checkered flag was not the usual round of handshakes, congratulations, or even the stoic acceptance of defeat that seasoned drivers have learned to master. No. This was raw. This was emotional. This was personal. Charles Leclerc stormed out of his Ferrari, helmet still on, visor down, walking straight past his engineers, ignoring his press officer who tried to hand him a towel and a bottle of water. His posture was stiff, fists clenched. He wasn't walking, he was marching. And he had a target, Lewis Hamilton. Hamilton had just finished a short cool-down conversation with Toto Wolff and George Russell by the back of the Mercedes motorhome, the trio visibly relaxed, even laughing slightly about something. Maybe it was the overtake, maybe it was Hamilton's start, maybe just the relief of a clean, well-executed weekend. That laugh stopped cold when Leclerc appeared behind them like a missile locked onto its target. There was no preamble, no diplomacy, just heat. You call that racing? Leclerc barked, ripping off his helmet. His voice was sharp, carrying across the nearby hospitality suites. That was dangerous. You knew what you were doing. You left me nowhere. Hamilton, visibly caught off guard, turned slowly. Charles, he started, calm, composed but cautious. It was a hard move, yes. But fair. You left the door open. The hell I did, Leclerc snapped, eyes blazing. You threw it in like it was karting, not Formula One. You could have ended my race in lap 3. Engineers and PR reps began closing in, forming that unspoken circle that usually comes before someone diffuses a situation. But this wasn't cooling down. Hamilton folded his arms, no longer defensive, now assertive. I race hard. Always have. And I'm not going to apologize for a clean overtake just because it hurt your ego. That was the trigger. Leclerc stepped in closer, just inches away. You think this is about ego? You cost me the race. You pushed me into a pack of lunatics, and you just waltz away with a win and a smirk like nothing happened. Toto Wolff finally stepped between them, one arm on each of their chests. Guys, this is not the time or place. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. But Leclerc wasn't done. You think because you're Lewis Hamilton, 7-time champion, you can do whatever the hell you want on track? I'm not your junior, and I'm not going to let you treat me like one. Hamilton, still ice-cold but now visibly tightening his jaw, leaned in and said just loud enough for a few nearby journalists to hear, then race me like one. Don't whine when you get outplayed. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the Red Bull personnel, watching from a few meters away, stopped mid-conversation. Cameras began pointing. The FIA officials nearby exchanged nervous glances. Ferrari's team principal, Frédéric Vasseur, was seen shaking his head as he walked briskly back toward the team garage, visibly irritated, but whether at Charles for losing his composure or at the FIA for not penalizing Hamilton remained unclear. Meanwhile, social media had already erupted. Fans divided into camps faster than tire compounds could heat up. Hard racing versus reckless aggression. Hashtag Hamilton dive bomb started trending within minutes, countered by hashtag Leclerc meltdown not long after. Analysts on Sky Sports and F1 TV scrambled to replay every angle of that chicane incident, using slow MO, telemetry overlays, cockpit audio. Was there contact? Did Leclerc lift too much? Was Hamilton's steering input too aggressive? Everyone had an opinion. Few had certainty. In the post-race press conference, the tension didn't ease. Sitting next to each other, Hamilton and Leclerc barely exchanged glances. When asked directly about the incident, Hamilton shrugged. It was racing. I saw a gap. I took it. That's what we do. Leclerc, on the other hand, leaned forward, voice low and deliberate. There's a line between racing and desperation. Today it was crossed. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. The war of words didn't stop there. Later that evening, in the Paddock's media pen, both drivers were approached again, separately. Hamilton, now sipping a protein shake, smirked when asked if the move had been psychological as much as physical. I don't need mind games, he said. I let the track do the talking. Leclerc, standing under the scarlet awning of the Ferrari hospitality suite, didn't hold back either. If that's how he wants to race this year, fine. I'll remember that. Behind the scenes, it was reported that Ferrari had lodged an informal complaint with the FIA, requesting a review of the maneuver. The stewards, after hours of deliberation, ultimately ruled that no further action was necessary. That only inflamed Ferrari's sense of injustice, and Leclerc's resolve. According to an insider from the Maranello camp, Charles spent nearly 2 hours with his race engineer and strategists that night, reviewing data, line choices, tire temps, looking for any edge, any weakness in Hamilton's craft he could exploit. He reportedly ended the session with a single cold sentence: "We beat him next time, no mercy." Meanwhile, Mercedes insiders claimed that Hamilton saw the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix as a turning point. "He's not here to collect points," one senior engineer said off-record. "He wants to dominate." This wasn't about overtaking Leclerc. This was about reminding everyone who the hell he is. Sponsors loved it. Liberty Media loved it. Even the FIA, though officially neutral, reportedly viewed the firestorm as exactly the kind of edge the sport needs. Viewer numbers for the race shattered previous Imola records. Social engagement tripled. The incident made headlines not just in sports outlets, but mainstream news, from BBC to CNN to La Gazzetta dello Sport. By Monday morning, F1 was on fire with speculation. Would the feud escalate? Would team orders be adjusted? Would Hamilton and Leclerc be summoned privately by the FIA? Were we witnessing the birth of the sport's next iconic rivalry? Insiders at both Ferrari and Mercedes hinted that future team briefings would come with new instructions. "If Charles is near Lewis, defend harder," a Ferrari strategist allegedly said. "Don't give him breathing room." At Mercedes, the message was simpler: we race. Full stop. In the days following the race, the tension lingered like the smell of burnt rubber. Simulator sessions were reported to be more intense than usual. Leclerc canceled 2 public appearances, citing schedule adjustments, but some believe it was a sign of how seriously he's taking this. Meanwhile, Hamilton was spotted leaving Brackley late at night, reportedly putting in extra hours with his data team, poring over every decimal of his car's performance. And all of it, traces back to one move at Varianti-Villeneuve. One decision. One message. That if you want to beat Lewis Hamilton, you better come with more than speed. You need steel. You need grit. And above all, you better be ready to bleed for it. Because the season just found its storyline. And it's personal. The moment Hamilton stepped out of his car and peeled off his helmet, sweat still clinging to his brow and jaw tense from the final laps of battle, he looked up instinctively, and that's when he saw him. Charles Leclerc. Already storming across the paddock with the kind of fury only the defeated carry. His red and black Ferrari suit was still zipped up, gloves clenched into fists, boots thudding with precision. He didn't look left. He didn't glance at the cameras. He didn't acknowledge the swarm of journalists yelling his name. He moved with intent. A heat wave of rage. He didn't stop at the Ferrari garage. He didn't stop at the FIA weigh-in. He didn't even stop at the press pen, where Sky Sports and Canal Plus were already bracing for fireworks. No. Leclerc went straight for the Mercedes hospitality unit, a place no rival casually walks into, especially not post-race, and especially not when it's Lewis Hamilton sitting inside. Inside, Hamilton was in the middle of a post-race debrief with Peter Bonington, sipping slowly from a metallic bottle, trying to cool down both physically and emotionally after a ruthless scrap for fourth. Mechanics were quietly sorting telemetry data, low voices murmuring about tire degradation and stint lengths. There was an unusual calm, a stillness after chaos, until the door swung open without a knock, fast and hard. Everyone turned. And there was Leclerc. Still in race gear. Eyes locked on Hamilton like heat-seeking missiles. No greeting. No diplomacy. He crossed the room in 4 long strides and stopped inches from Lewis. "You call that racing?" he snarled, voice sharp, jaw clenched so tight his words barely made it out. "You dive-bomb me in turn 5, make me brake, and then say it's fair?" Hamilton, caught mid-sip, slowly placed his bottle down, his expression unreadable, that same cool stare he'd worn 100 times before, from McLaren to Mercedes, from Nico to Max. But this was different. This was personal. "I made the corner," Lewis replied calmly, his voice a measured contrast to the storm in front of him. "You saw me. There was space." "No," Leclerc fired back, voice raised, hands gesturing in disbelief. "I had Norris behind. I had Piastri behind. You knew the train. You knew what that move would do to my line. You compromised my apex and left me wide. You didn't just fight me. You ambushed me." By now, every pair of eyes in the room had turned. One engineer froze mid-keystroke. A mechanic with a sandwich in hand slowly lowered it, forgetting to chew. Even Bonington, always the composed lieutenant, looked between them with growing unease. Hamilton stood up, slowly, matching Leclerc's height, their helmets off but battle helmets still firmly on. "You left the door open," Lewis said, slightly firmer now. "I didn't hit you. I didn't force you off. That's racing, Charles. Or would you prefer I stay behind and wave every time you cut the chicane?" Leclerc's breathing grew heavier. His hands curled into fists. "Every time you don't start from pole, this is what happens. You force it. You gamble. You play roulette with our careers. You're not chasing titles anymore, Lewis. You're chasing shadows. This isn't your era." The silence that followed was colder than carbon fiber. For a second, the room seemed to shrink, the air sucked out of it. Two drivers. Two eras. One rage. That's when the door opened again, this time with urgency. Toto Wolff entered fast, eyes darting, posture rigid. He'd clearly heard the shouting from the hallway. No smile. No calm leadership tone. Just a hand raised like a referee calling time. "Enough," Toto barked, stepping between them physically. "Not like this. Not in here." Neither moved. "If you've got something to say," Toto continued, his Austrian accent slicing through the tension, "you say it with respect. You say it professionally. You say it like drivers. Like men. Not like schoolboys." Hamilton didn't flinch. Leclerc's jaw clenched tighter. Bonington tried to speak. "We can bring up the data, Charles, if that." Leclerc cut him off. "I don't need the data. I felt the car snap. I saw my race collapse because of one overtake that had no business happening there. Not like that." "And what?" Hamilton shot back. "You're gonna lecture me on clean driving? After what you did to George in Jeddah? After how you blocked Alonso in Singapore last year like he was invisible?" That touched a nerve. Leclerc stepped forward again. "I raced. You attacked." "Oh come on," Hamilton snapped, dropping the calm. "This isn't a tea party, Charles. This is F1. You wanted a title fight? Then fight. Don't whine every time someone throws a punch." The words hit harder than any contact in the race. Toto raised both hands, louder now. "I said enough." Silence. A long beat passed. Leclerc exhaled, sharp, furious, almost trembling. "You've changed," he said quietly, almost more to himself. "Or maybe I was wrong about you from the start." He turned and walked out without another word. The door slammed behind him. Hamilton stood there for a second, breathing through his nose, eyes fixed on the spot where Leclerc had stood. He didn't say a word. Bonington finally spoke. "You okay?" Lewis blinked slowly. "He'll get over it. They all do." Outside, the paddock was buzzing. Social media had already exploded. Hashtag Hamilton versus Leclerc was trending globally within 5 minutes. Journalists were digging for quotes. Sky F1 aired replays of the incident from every onboard angle. Ferrari PR had gone radio silent. Mercedes had issued a tight-lipped statement: hard racing. No contact. No penalties. No comment. But in the paddock, everyone knew. This wasn't just a battle for P4. This was the beginning of something new, or maybe something ancient, reignited. Two lions in the twilight of dominance. Two legacies clashing not over wins, but over respect. And neither of them was going to back down. Leclerc backed off slightly, just enough to avoid a full confrontation, but he didn't walk away in defeat. His eyes didn't waver. He stood there, his jaw tight, staring first at Toto Wolff and then directly at Lewis Hamilton. There was no hesitation in his voice when he said, "This isn't over." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. A storm calmly declared before the thunder. Without waiting for a reply, Leclerc turned and left, the echo of his boots on the floor fading behind him, but not the tension he left hanging in the air. 15 minutes passed like a slow burn. Then, with a slam of urgency and barely concealed fury, Frederic Vasseur arrived at the Mercedes motorhome. There was no media in sight. No PR buffer. No diplomacy. Just the team principal of Ferrari, moving like a man on a mission. He wasn't wearing his usual composed expression. His face was set like stone. In one hand, he carried a tablet, his weapon of choice. In the other, an invisible weight of frustration and resentment that seemed to fill the entire room with static the moment he stepped in. Mercedes staff tried to intercept him, to calm him down, to buy a few seconds of time, standard protocol. He brushed them aside with a sharp, mechanical no. His voice was strained, almost shaking not from fear but from the effort of holding himself back. "Where is Toto?" he asked, eyes scanning. "Where is Lewis?" The staff hesitated. One look from Vasseur made it clear. He wasn't going anywhere until he got what he came for. Soon, the door closed behind him. Privacy. Silence. Tension so thick you could almost hear it breathing. Toto Wolff, Lewis Hamilton, and Frederic Vasseur were now seated in the same room, but none of them looked at ease. Vasseur didn't waste time. He placed the tablet on the table, tapped the screen with force, and brought up the footage. He had already cued the clip. Lap 3. Sector 2. The chicane. Different camera angles. On board from Charles's car, from Lewis's, the overhead view. Telemetry. Brake inputs. Throttle data. Steering angle. GPS overlays synced to the millisecond. No commentary. No distractions. Just raw, brutal, indisputable data. "Tell me," Vasseur said, his voice ice-cold, low, and deadly precise. "Tell me this is acceptable. Tell me that this is what we want the next generation of drivers to learn, to admire, to copy. Tell me this is the standard of elite racecraft." Toto didn't flinch. He leaned forward slightly, clasped his hands in front of him, and answered with calm authority. "Fred," he said slowly, "our analysis shows Lewis was already committed to the move well before the braking zone. He had the inside line. He didn't lock up. He didn't overshoot. And on corner exit, look at the footage, he left space. Enough space." Vasseur's laugh was hollow, bitter. He leaned in as well, voice rising just a touch. Enough space for himself, maybe. But not for Charles. Not for a fair fight. Charles had to lift to avoid contact. And that destroyed his drive out of the corner. That ruined his whole stint. That's not hard racing. That's not bravery. That's not edge-of-the-seat Formula One. That's opportunistic chaos. It's a stunt, not a move. A gamble without consequence, because Charles chose not to crash. Hamilton, silent until now, finally spoke. He wasn't irritated. He was measured, precise, with that quiet authority he's earned over 2 decades at the sharpest edge of motorsport. "Fred," he said, eyes steady, voice even, "I've been racing longer than most of the grids even had a driver's license. I know the difference between aggressive and dirty. That was aggressive. That was controlled. If Charles had braked even a meter later, we'd have touched. But he didn't. He lifted. He saw it coming. That's experience on his part. And mine." But Vasseur wasn't ready to yield. Experience isn't immunity, Lewis. Experience doesn't give you the right to rewrite racing etiquette. I'm not just here because of Charles. I'm here because if this goes unchecked, we're going to see 10 rookies next year dive bombing into corners thinking they're racing like Hamilton. And we both know that's not going to end well for anyone. Hamilton didn't blink. You're assuming they have the judgment to know when to back out. That's the difference. That's why this didn't end in carbon fiber everywhere. Because Charles did back out. And I knew he would. Because I know him. I've raced him. I respect him. Toto cut in again, firm but not aggressive. "Fred, if the stewards thought it crossed the line, we'd be talking about a penalty right now. They looked at the same footage you did. Same data. Same corner. Same moment. And they let it stand. That tells you something." Vasseur gave a tight, joyless smile. The stewards saw what they wanted to see. Or what they were allowed to see. But I'm not a steward. I'm a team principal. And I see a 7-time world champion using his legacy as a shield. That move set a precedent. Don't be surprised when others follow it, and don't have the same finesse. There was a beat of silence after that. No one moved. The tablet screen went dark from inactivity, but no one reached to tap it. The room was thick with tension. Past the walls, outside the motorhome, fans were cheering, engines were cooling, and journalists were speculating. But inside, 3 of the most powerful men in Formula One sat on the edge of a rift. Lewis spoke again. Quieter this time. If Charles has a problem with me, he knows where I am. I respect the hell out of him. But I won't apologize for racing like a champion. Vasseur stood. He picked up the tablet, slow and deliberate. You're right, he said, tone unreadable. He does know where you are. And trust me, he'll find you. Because for Charles, this isn't about one move. It's about what kind of driver he wants to be. And who he has to beat to become that. He turned to Toto. And you, don't be so sure your driver hasn't just lit a fire under mine. Then he left. No handshake, no goodbye. Just the quiet click of the door, and the weight of everything he'd said, and everything he hadn't, hanging in the air like a storm waiting to break. The tension that began on track at Imola didn't just stay confined to the curbs and runoff areas. It metastasized into something bigger, something heavier, something far more dangerous. The paddock hadn't felt like this in years. There was electricity in the air, but not the good kind. This wasn't excitement. It was a storm building in real time. Vasseur's words lingered long after the meeting ended. That's arrogance, he'd said, his voice flat but his eyes blazing with a mixture of disbelief and disdain. If that's the tone for the rest of the season, then fine. But don't act surprised when it comes back to bite. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The tension in the room was so thick it might as well have been a physical presence, pressing down on everyone like gravity had doubled. No official protest was filed. No visit to the stewards. No drawn-out war of paperwork and penalties. Ferrari, in a rare display of political restraint, chose to keep their powder dry. But make no mistake, they weren't backing down. They were choosing their moment. Because in Formula One, silence is rarely submission. Sometimes it's just strategy. And the message was received by everyone in that room. The gloves were off, the civility was over, and a new war had just begun. Back in the Ferrari garage, away from the cameras, away from the PR-sanitized interviews, Charles Leclerc sat hunched over the telemetry screen. The data was there. The traces, the braking zones, the throttle inputs. Cold, hard numbers. But it wasn't the data that made his jaw clench, it was the memory. The memory of being forced wide, of nearly ending up in the gravel, of the grin he thought he saw on Hamilton's face as the Mercedes swept past. He muttered under his breath, just loud enough for his race engineer to hear. I'm not giving him that space again. His engineer, cautious, tried to de-escalate. We'll look at the footage, Charles. Maybe it was tight, but racing. No, Leclerc cut in sharply, eyes still glued to the screen. He forces it every time. He expects me to yield. Next time, I hold the line. If we touch, we touch. Those weren't the words of a man playing games anymore. That wasn't a threat. That was a declaration. One that sent a chill down the spine of his team. Because when a driver like Charles, precise, calculated, usually composed, starts talking like that, you know he's crossed a line internally. And once that line's crossed, there's no walking it back. Meanwhile, over at Mercedes, Hamilton was holding court. His inner circle had formed around him: physio, PR rep, race engineer, and a couple of key mechanics. The mood wasn't exactly celebratory, but there was a quiet satisfaction humming beneath the surface. Hamilton looked relaxed, even amused. Someone, probably from the comms team, asked him how he felt about the blowback from Ferrari. About whether this might hurt his image, sour things with the Tifosi, or create long-term friction with Leclerc. Hamilton just smirked. I'm not here to make friends, he said. I'm here to win. If Charles wants to make it a rivalry, he picked the wrong guy. There was no bravado in the way he said it. Just ice-cold certainty. The kind that comes from years of fighting for championships. From knowing what it takes. From remembering every bruise, every betrayal, every political knife in the back. Hamilton's eyes had seen it all. And right now, those eyes weren't just focused, they were dangerous. As night fell on Imola, the atmosphere in the paddock shifted into something darker. The media teams tried to downplay it. The press releases were polished, the interviews measured. But underneath it all, everyone could feel it. The tension. The barely suppressed hostility. Whispers passed from garage to garage. Strategists chatted in code. Team principals exchanged glances that said more than words ever could. This wasn't about a racing incident anymore. This was about ego. About territory. About who had the moral high ground and who was willing to get their hands dirty. Mechanics who usually joked across team lines kept to themselves. Engineers walked a little faster past rival pit walls. Journalists refreshed their inboxes every 5 minutes, hoping for an anonymous tip, a leaked message, something to confirm what everyone already suspected, that a fire had been lit, and nobody was interested in putting it out. Insiders spoke of a moment, shortly after the race, when Leclerc and Hamilton crossed paths in the FIA hospitality corridor. No cameras. No fans. Just a quiet hallway and two alpha drivers walking in opposite directions. Leclerc didn't slow down. Neither did Hamilton. They brushed shoulders, maybe even bumped slightly, and neither looked back. Cold. Calculated. A silent middle finger delivered with precision. In the media center, rumors swirled like smoke. Some said Ferrari had a dossier of radio messages and GPS data they were saving for Montreal. Others claimed Mercedes had already reached out to the FIA for clarification on racing conduct, just in case. And still others said nothing would come of it at all. But that didn't stop the speculation. Because speculation is fuel in Formula One. And right now, there was enough fuel to set the whole season ablaze. And this is what no one will admit on record. Not the team bosses, not the drivers, not even the pundits. This is what they live for. The drama. The chaos. The pressure. Because underneath the engineering brilliance and the corporate polish, Formula One is still gladiatorial. It's still personal. And when the armor starts to crack, when the masks slip, that's when it gets real. That's when it gets good. With Montreal looming, a circuit known for its walls, its tight margins, its zero tolerance for mistakes, there's a sense that this story hasn't just begun. It's about to explode. Because Leclerc is done playing nice. Hamilton isn't backing down. And both teams are arming themselves for something more than just a points battle. It's no longer about winning the race. It's about who you beat to get there, and how you make them pay for trying.